I did say welcome, so welcome.
Thank you.
We're back with Cameo and Connor. We're here to talk about more things products. Today is problems and opportunities. Sorry, I touched the camera for a second.
That is okay.
So we're just gonna get to it, okay? We're gonna start with a fun question. There's some debate here, and I want to see where you guys land on either side of this.
We love debating.
Good.
We do.
I love it when you debate. We're gonna get more engagement that way. We have some debate.
Okay.
Which comes first, the user or the problem?
I don't know why there's so many debate on this, honestly. Who's debating about this?
It's not us.
So
I don't.
So you're telling me you're unified?
Well, I'll say my answer and then we'll see.
I guess we'll see.
That's right.
I don't.
The idea is, should you take your target market and find the pain, or observe a pain and then find your market?
So, there can be no problem without a user. There is no problem in the world that doesn't involve a person, right? Like you need a human for a problem.
Yeah.
You also cannot solve a problem without empathy for the user. So how can you say, "Oh, I'm going to go find a problem and then go and try and solve it"? You have to find people who have problems and then figure out how to solve their problems. But to disconnect the problem from the person is half the problem with software development, in my mind.
Yeah. Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like you might land in some opportunity space because of experience or background. Like I'm going into the automotive industry because I have access to people in automotive. But literally, you see, my very first thought is I have access to the people in the industry. Like you might identify an opportunity, but almost always it's going to, I mean, maybe there's a scenario where it's like you're looking at financial markets but there's always going to be a person.
Human, right?
Yeah. And how can you validate that the problem is worth going after unless you talk to the people about it?
Yeah. I mean, we build software for people. We build businesses around solving people's problems. So I think you always have to start with a person in mind.
Yeah.
Like innovation is for the humans.
Yeah.
For the people.
Yeah. So you guys
We are aligned.
uncharacteristically aligned.
Uncharacteristically.
No, we agree a lot
I
more
feel
than
like
you're
we're
probably given credit
I feel
for.
like we're 70 or 80-20.
Is there a threshold that you would say as far as we're selecting users?
Okay.
Is there a threshold as far as like how small or large of a group of users that you want to look at for when you're solving problems?
Well, ultimately, because you're probably building a business around, and you wouldn't necessarily have to, but you want a problem that lots of people have if you're trying to build a business, right? You can't if you find a person and a problem that they're having, and you say, "Oh, I can get behind that problem." You definitely want to make sure that more than 1 or 20 people are having that problem, or it's probably not worth solving unless you can charge exorbitant amounts of money, right? Like if you're doing cancer research and you're trying to get a drug for a particular type of cancer that's incredibly rare, you still probably can get away with charging $250,000 for treatment,
right,
to cover your research costs. But if you're doing software development, there might not be a market that justifies it. In fact, it's a very common problem for people who are trying to innovate to find a good problem to solve that not enough people have.
I think this is where like a lot of the business school strategy tools you hear about can actually come in handy. It's like Porter's 5 forces kind of stuff. I also, so you think about some of that, like in the case of cancer, like huge barriers to entry. So maybe that's attractive.
Maybe
if you have loads of money and high expertise, then maybe that's a space you're interested in.
Yeah.
There's a matrix that I've had drawn for me a bunch of times that I draw too. That's like the x-axis is problems, and it goes from known problems to unknown problems. And then the y-axis is solutions, and it goes from known solutions to unknown solutions. So the lowest quadrant on the bottom left would be a known problem with a known solution, right? And this is the space where it's just a race to the bottom on pricing.
Right. Yeah.
And then there's unknown problems, known solutions. Like this is hammer looking for nail. This is like kind of Chat GPT right now, and it doesn't mean it won't be successful. It just means you gotta find why it should matter. Yeah. And sometimes you get lucky, and your hammer was a good hammer, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
And then there's just to play the whole thing out, unknown problems, unknown solutions. Like this is the future. This is where like futurists, people who call themselves futurists, love to sit. And then there's like known problems, unknown solutions. Like that's cancer research. Like that's the spaces that you need loads of money and expertise typically to win there.
Yeah.
So
and all four of those quadrants have space for innovation, right?
Absolutely.
Even when you're on a race to the bottom,
yes,
the innovation is the efficiency. There,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, like silly bands. You guys remember silly bands? Like there was, maybe that's a known solution with no known problem, but like kids love toys like rubber bands. Like wristbands were all the rage at that time, like Live Strong bracelets. And then it's like, oh, a silly band. And then they crushed it.
Yeah. Or you remember spinners for a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
Fidget spinners.
They have the moment.
Yeah.
Depending on the path you take, how does this impact the way that you validate during the innovation process? How do you validate your solution to problems, depending on your user groups?
This is assuming that our problem's been validated.
That's right. Well, if we could even start there. How do we even validate the problem?
Well,
start with our users.
We start by not building software, probably.
Yeah.
You come up with experiments, and there is a large body of work about how you can validate ideas using experiments. It was what Lean Startup was written about. It's what Testing Business Ideas is written about.
Teresa Torres.
There's a whole body of work on how you can test to see if somebody is interested in a problem or if there's an actual market for that problem. The power of like paid marketing is that you can get in front of very targeted people and see if they'll click through on your stuff.
There's a guy, a professor at BYU named Niall Hatch, who basically devoted his life to that question. He calls it entrepreneurial innovation, but he runs an incubator that has like $3 billion of market cap at this point over like 10 years. And it's all started by students, which is undergrad students even, which is incredible to me. And he talks about access to the people. Like I was thinking about what you said about you should have a ton of people. I was thinking about the Airbnb story because they had one relatively small group of designers going to conferences, but the pain was so acute. Like when you find something that's such an acute pain, it's likely that adjacent markets have inefficiencies as well. Like that's the story of Airbnb. Like, of course, designers going to conferences were a minority of people trying to find temporary housing. Not a huge group, but the fact that it was so difficult probably should have been an indicator that other markets had inefficiencies that they could spread into.
Yeah.
Right. The market was there and was big, but they were viewing it as being smaller than the potential of what it was going to be. It wasn't like their initial identified market didn't represent the full scope of what their market ended up being.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's an interesting case. That's cool. How about we go into defining, since we're just talking about this, defining pain versus problem. Pain tends to be the emotional signal, right? And then the problem is the actual action that we take.
Is the pain just how, like, the intensity of the problem?
I know that this delineation is often made. I'm not convinced it's as important as people
Yeah, well, I guess
Treated.
the follow-up question is, are we trying to alleviate pain or solve the problem?
Again, I'm not even certain that I know the difference. And I knew this question was coming, so I'm not necessarily trying to be contrary, but
Premeditated contrarian.
but if
That should be your
I'm
new tag sign.
premeditated contrarian, maybe. You know, if my foot is hurting, right? I have a bunion on my toe. And every time I stand up and I walk, my foot hurts. That's a pain, right? My problem, it might be that my shoe's too tight. It might be that I have a bunion. It might be a combination of the fact that I have a bunion and my shoe's too tight. Tight shoe might have caused the bunion, or maybe I had, there's...
Or the problem's the reaction.
Or the
Like
problem...
you can't walk.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, I probably should start with just testing a bunch of solutions because I don't know what the actual, the pain is that my foot hurts. I don't know what actually caused it. It might have a bunch of contributions. If I'm trying to figure out an innovation to solve, if a lot of people have a sore foot, I'm going to just start somewhere and I'm going to test by providing a solution to one of the problems that I think could cause it, and then learning about it as quickly as I can so I can move on to the next one. And it's where the user is so important, right? Like, actually, something that Niall Hatch said to us the time that we met with him was kind of around you don't know what the problem is until you start to try and solve it and have people tell you whether or not that solves it, right? Because if you, at least once you provide a solution, they can say, well, my foot still hurts. Right? Like anything else, if you go into the situation saying, I know what the problem is, you're probably wrong. It's easy to know what a pain is. It's a lot easier to know what a pain is because somebody will tell you what the pain is. But they don't always know what the problem is either. That's my perception on the problem.
Kind of a branches versus the trunk or the roots.
Yeah. It's really hard to identify, I think.
Yeah, and we love Niall, as you can tell, but his big thing is prototypes, like as low cost prototypes as possible. And so that's to Cameo's point, like he believes if you can get a low fidelity prototype into someone's hands, they'll tell you about their problem.
Yes.
Especially like if it's in a case of data, like if you can somehow funnel their data into it, they'll tell you if what you're doing works or doesn't for their problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we missed this. One of my good friends is a CTO, and my very first product boss, it works for him. And they were both kind of talking to me the other day, and it was the question is like, how much should the process hold weight? Like if you identify a problem and a pain and you make a prototype, and let's say you don't do prototypes, and you go through your process, you do surveys, and then you do interviews, and then you do more surveys and interviews. Like, do you know what to build?
You don't.
You don't. Like, right. you know more about the user, and so you can make a better decision on what to build. But you don't actually know what to build until you've built something and they tell you if it works or it doesn't.
Right, and they tell you this didn't solve my problem.
This doesn't actually work. Why did you do it that way? I told you about this other pain. You didn't hear it, right? Or, I didn't realize this was actually the pain.
It is interesting because I think product management, somebody on Lenny's podcast recently said, product management is just way too navel-gazing, Yeah. And I think it's that, like, research is super important. But the very best research is to give somebody a potential solution and to test that, ideally in the very most cheap way as possible, to say, hey, I believe your problem is this. Here's what I think a solution could be, and learn what their actual problem is.
Yeah. Even in these scenarios, when we're talking about like selecting our users first, because it sounds like, and you're convincing me more and more, we start with the user and then we discover the problem. What methods do we even use to select our user groups? Like, how do you even know what users you care about? You know, if I want to make an app for, you know, DoorDash for private cooks, how do I even get my tests in front of the people that this would be relevant?
Hustle.
So-
Knock on doors.
No, I mean,
So here,
it's only slightly tongue in cheek.
I think that most startups are founded by people who have typically deep domain expertise, who have experienced a problem themselves and try and come up with a solution to solve it.
Yeah.
Now, it's different in the corporate world. Typically, for established organizations, that what should drive who is my customer is your existing markets, right? Like either you have an existing market that you want to expand, in which case you have an existing user base, right? Or you're trying to break into a new market, and you should have a body of research about why you would want to break into the market, meaning you've seen market trends that say there is a potential market that's kind of sidelined to where we're already playing. But it's rare for large organizations to be able to radically pivot away from the market that they're already in, partially because like you use what you got. And ideally you're talking to your customers regularly enough that they're telling you about pains that they have that are sidelined to whatever your primary value proposition that you're already working on. Yeah. I would say unless you're going into an incubator like the kind that is at BYU, where essentially people are assigned kind of users to go and help, or kind of customers to go solve problems for, I think it's pretty rare for somebody to just be told, hey, go figure out a customer and a customer problem to solve.
Yeah.
I just don't know that it happens that often.
Yeah, I agree. Back to this grid, right? Of like known problems, unknown problems. I think maybe your question is kind of especially in the unknown problem space.
Right.
I really do think it's like back to the strategy idea too. One thing you should consider is our access to customers. Like one of the most rational things incumbents, stakeholders at existing companies do is tell their product managers they're not going after some radically new market. That is extremely rational. Mm-hmm. Like, do you even have access to that market? Could you talk to 5% of the market? Could you talk to 1%? Do you have contact to some percent of the market that's meaningful enough to understand it? And typically the answer is no, right? I mean, if you're building Wampets and you want to go after the widgets group and there's no overlap in your customers, then telling someone to pivot from Wampets to widgets is maybe a bad idea, unless you have the hustle to figure out how to get at the widgets people and they'll listen to you.
Well, and I think in corporate, you see a lot of like the rise of innovation labs where people will drop in like innovation labs, and those innovation labs are staffed with innovators who are supposed to go and find customers and problems to solve, kind of, which is I've always thought a real almost backwards way of looking at innovation.
Yeah.
Within a market and an industry, especially if you really know your customers, there's a ton of opportunity and potential to be able to innovate without needing to switch from widgets to Wampets. Are there cheaper ways or better ways that we can design our widget so it delights our customers better? That would be innovation. Are there ways that we could figure out how to radically lower the costs involved in those so that we could sell them at a better cost, or, figure out how to make a silly thing, whatever that is, that's because we're already making that widget, right? There's always so much potential for innovation without needing to jump to a different market.
Finding new users.
New users. There's a whole lot of there's a lot of different types of innovation, and it doesn't always need to be in the unknown,
Well, and it makes sense that like in the corporate space, you use the resources that you have, right?
Uh-huh.
If I have 500,000 users, then trying to make them pivot
Yeah.
seems counterproductive.
Uh-huh.
Right. So, and Yeah, that makes sense. When we're talking about users and the research that we do to try to discover the problems and the pain points that they have, how do we leverage empathy research and human-centered design principles into like to directly help us in our product development and our decisions that we're making?
We are ideally getting out of the building, talking to actual people first before we start coming up probably with even our ideas of any of that. I mean, human-centered design advocates for talking to the customer first, which is pretty rare, honestly, in most corporate environments and in most startup environments. It is not uncommon for people to get all the way down to signing their MVP or designing their next feature set without ever talking to a customer.
That is terrifying to me.
It is terrifying to me too. You know, I truly believe that teams should be on a cadence where they are talking to their customers regularly throughout every sprint. And like, empathy is kind of easy because if you're actually talking to real people, it's pretty hard not to have empathy. You know, somebody who's using maybe not even a product, but an idea, and they're talking about it. It's hard to listen to somebody talk about something that they're going to use and not kind of feel what they're feeling.
Yeah. I love for Porter Desk sites, user journey maps, I probably use that word wrong, but even the idea of if you know kind of the opportunity space or industry or like where you want to which people you want to focus with, just even going with them. My very first startup was, well, probably not my first, but the first one that had any traction that we did it this way was for people primarily in wheelchairs. So I found an old electric wheelchair, and me and all the founders took like turns for 4 to 5 days each, like in the wheelchair full time, trying to live our life in a wheelchair. And we already had a user journey map. We were just trying to find more empathy. But like the very first thing we did is we sat down with people who were primarily in wheelchairs and said, literally walked with them the whole day and just said, you know, and you say, how typical of a day was this? And then you just like write down everything. And anytime you see them having a problem, you just say, tell me about that. Right. And you just do it. We did the same thing in warehouses and with auto mechanics as well. You just like watch them for a whole day and then try it for a whole day. And you will almost certainly find something.
This is also why I have so much personal passion about bringing the engineering mind into the problem space. Because if you shut your engineers off from that potential of empathy, they also can't bring their mind to the problem, right? They don't get the benefit of, oh, now I understand, right? Like what it is to not have to be in a wheelchair all day.
This is why I would love Nerd Prime to have a feature where we like integrate with one of these session captures.
Okay, cool.
It's like, okay, we're capturing a session and we have our little CSAT or NPS tool. Anytime there's a low one, we just like bank those and then we let the engineers earn points by watching low CSAT recordings.
That's cool.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like,
cool.
oh, this person had a failure. They gave us a 1 out of 10 on customer satisfaction. And now the engineers can earn points or whatever by watching it.
Oh, that's super. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, that's a fun idea. Honestly, that's kind of been the method that my team working on customer service tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
We go and we take calls. We sit and watch them go through it, right? The nice thing about the phases of this company is that we started in such a startup phase that, you know, me and my lead engineer are literally sitting next to customer service and going, how do I even fix this? And we're like, we don't know.
Sure.
We'll figure it out. And it makes sense. It's funny because like you say it now and it seems like a formal process of like go spend time with your user. But it's funny to me because I realize like that tends to be a lot of people's base idea, right? I should just go spend time with them. It's not actually that complex. You just go hang out. You see what makes you mad.
But it's still incredibly rare.
It's
that
scary.
I believe. It's surprising to me that it's rare, but I do believe it. I mean, in my career, in the tools that I've built over time, when I would go, and I've specifically been designing or producing customer service tools for a long time, I would go and interview customer service all the time, and it seemed like a special thing to them, and I just never understood how people could make decisions if you weren't doing that.
Yeah.
Like, especially if you're trying to come up with cool ideas to make flows better, to create efficiencies, that kind of stuff, you have to spend time slamming your head against the desk with them.
Yeah,
or
you
you're
do.
just not going to get it.
And you got to be careful that you don't get bought into the idea that you're right.
Yeah. That's what's interesting is I have met people, we talked about it last time, when you're in a feature factory, people just think they know what will solve the problem. And they don't actually spend time with the problem, and it's interesting with larger corps because sometimes up above, you'll think that you have a problem because like workforce management is reporting numbers that you don't like.
Yeah.
We need to go correct these things. And really, customer service is completely unrelated to the problem that they are imagining.
Sure.
It's an interesting thing. I'm surprised that this isn't more common for people to spend time with their users.
Me too.
And you've been doing this a minute.
Yeah.
Why don't they?
That's a good question. Why don't they?
That's the question we're asking.
Yeah.
We're trying to make a consulting business out of the fact that that's reality.
I believe that, I think that it is a natural inclination for people to want to be right and believe that they are right? It's part of the ego that is built into humans.
Yeah.
You put that into a corporate structure where typically you have people who rise through the ranks, they're managers, they're upper managers, and like traditional business management says, if you go to a top tier college and you learn business management the way that business management is supposed to work, then you have achieved the right to come in and have a strong opinion and be right? It's like being a doctor, and you're right when you say, I think you have a bunion on your foot because
I went to Harvard.
Because you went to Harvard. The same thing is it's hubris kind of by education and kind of by authority, where I'm right because I'm the executive. Or honestly, you see the same kind of behaviors for engineers or even for product managers. I'm right because I'm an engineer, or I'm right because I'm the product manager.
Or I talk to customers because it's my job, not yours, engineer.
Yeah. And now I'm right because I have this special path to the information.
I'm the gatekeeper of the interviews.
Yeah.
I've noticed that because like in previous jobs, especially in like the business analyst career, it's largely prescriptive, right? You measure the gap, you fill that gap with whatever engineering plan that you have, and you get in there. And this, as product management goes, it's really interesting because this is so much more about facilitating. Trying to get the collaboration from all sides. It's a lot. It's way more fun. It's way more fun.
It is way more fun, right?
Just cranking out documents on what you think is going to work and you just hope it sticks, right? But like the actual facilitation, I think, causes way higher chances of success if you're doing it right. If you're actually bringing your engineers to the customer service floor or whatever it is. This is my example because it's the reality I'm in right now. But if you're bringing everyone to the table and letting them talk, like you said, the empathy just happens if you have people face to face. And then like my lead engineer has had this. The whole reason he wanted to be on this project was empathy.
Right.
He wanted to help them because we all work together, and he could identify that they were having these problems. So we're spending time in this problem space. We're looking at the way that our users are experiencing pain. How do we actually identify the opportunities now that we're in the space?
It's always the same thing. We come up with the smallest solution that we can and we get it into users' hands as quickly as we can. Really, experimentation and prototyping should drive everything we always do, always and forever, right? Like there should just, and I think it just requires a cultural shift where I'm calling this replacing assumptions with evidence, as just like you have to move your entire corporation from being assumption driven to being evidence driven, because it's natural for people to believe that they have the right idea. And everybody in the organization believes they have the right idea, right? You can go talk to the janitor and he believes he knows what you need to build in your product to solve the problems, right? Everybody has a solution. And I think probably one of the most wasteful things organizations do is allow people to spend time debating solutions, right? Like, why would you spend time arguing about that? I think I have a better idea than Connor. It's so wasteful. Come up with an experiment that you can run and replace your assumption with evidence and drive the conversations about assumptions into everything that you do, because you're just wasting so much time chasing and arguing about assumptions.
I have a little notebook that I keep now. And this comes up all the time. I'll be in meetings with stakeholders. I'll be running stand-ups, whatever it is, and it's my assumptions journal. Right? Anytime I'm like, wait, do we know that?
Yeah, how do we? Wait,
how do we know this?
Do we know this?
Yeah.
Maybe don't.
That's the question. How do we know that?
How do we know that?
That's a
Why
question
do
that's
we
really
believe
hard
that?
to not answer.
It is.
Yeah.
Like when someone says, well, it's this, you say, how do we know that?
Yeah.
And as long as you ask it with the right tone of voice.
Right. It's delicate.
Yeah.
It is. That's so a hobby of mine is colloquially it's called street epistemology. And the whole idea is tell me something that you believe in and tell me about the methods that you use to determine that's true.
Sure.
And it's just fun for me. I find people are really interesting. They have a lot of great stories to tell when they tell you why they think this thing is true. You get a different response when you're at work, when you want to ask about, like, how do you know that's true?
Oh, interesting.
They go, well, what do you mean?
Well, because that's not a common question.
And knowledge is power.
Yeah.
So if you're questioning someone's knowledge,
yes,
you're saying, how powerful is that knowledge?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Well, we know this about customers. How do we know that? You're saying, how powerful is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's scary, especially when an executive is saying, we should build this thing. And you say, how do we know we should build that thing? You're basically questioning whether they have the authority to tell you what to do.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable
for everyone.
The whole room.
That's right.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing. It's an interesting problem.
Well, and I believe that the way to start to bring that idea into things is we as individual builders have to be willing to apply that same criteria to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
It's always, you see it all the time, product managers especially, they'll be like, hey, my stakeholder's trying to get me to build this thing. I believe we should build this other thing. And you say, okay, what evidence do you have, right? And they also don't have evidence.
Yeah.
Who wins that battle?
Well, they lose that battle all the time. So if you want your stakeholders to take seriously evidence, you have to be willing to let that evidence disprove your own theories first or your own belief systems first, and then hold those up as I had this theory and I was wrong, and here's how I disproved it. Because then I think Kim Scott in Radical Candor, she says you can't expect people to accept candor until they've been able to give you candor, right? As a leader, you can't expect people to be okay with you being super aggressively candid with them unless they've already gotten to do that to you first, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, for me, when I'm even at work, if my answer is, oh, I don't know. I like that because that means I get to go learn a thing.
Yeah, sure.
I'll go find out. I don't know, but I'll find out. Because of that, I love it when someone else tells me they don't know.
Yeah.
It's my favorite because it's like, cool, I'll learn with you.
Yeah, sure, exactly.
Let's go find out. I've learned that in my time doing this, I've had to kind of acclimate some of my team to like, it's okay to not know. I want you to tell me if you don't know, because then we will go figure it out. That's the actual innovation, right?
Well, and that's pretty breakthrough, just because like I don't know is we look down on people for not knowing, right? You hire a professional because you want them to know.
Yeah.
And in fact, like having an assumption or a belief about something is not inherently wrong. We are hired as professionals because we have expertise and we're bringing the expertise to the problem. Yeah. But we just have to acknowledge that expertise doesn't equate being right.
Sure. Wouldn't it be great in some dystopian future whenever someone at work told you something that they think is right, there's just like a scale of 1 to 10 of how much information they actually have about the thing they're telling you. Right? It's like,
well, and
your boss is saying something, and it's like there's like a 2 out of 10 above their head, and you're like, oh no.
It would be really good next to also their confidence and like I have a 2 for information, but I'm on 8. Okay,
let me add one thing.
No, he just pushed my appointment just a second.
Fantastic.
Cameo touched on this by bringing up Radical Candor, which is inherently a communication book. I think one of the issues we have too is we have all these product managers who, I think a lot of product managers, if you ask them what are their strengths, something that would appear in the top 5 most common things would be like communication or storytelling, and which in my experience is just not the whole truth. Like in this example Cameo used, where it's like your executive has an idea and you have an idea and neither of you have done that, like any evidence finding, that's inherently a communication problem. Like you failed to communicate to them that you had another idea that you thought was better, and now they're communicating theirs to you. Or even if you did, you failed to tell the right story. And so if you're finding evidence, that's great. But if you don't know how to communicate or do the storytelling in addition to the evidence, then it won't matter. Because if the moment that someone shows up with more authority on what's getting built and says, we're building this thing, and you haven't told them about the evidence you've been gathering, you're kind of you just put everyone in a really crappy place.
Yeah. Because
they're all stoked about their idea. You know it's not the right direction, you think, because you have evidence to suggest it's the wrong direction. And now you have to somehow tell them the story and communicate without basically telling them they're wrong. People don't like to be told they're wrong.
Yeah, well, especially around other people.
That's right.
This is why I also think that we need to kind of radicalize Agile. Most Agile, as it's implemented in most organizations, because it's primarily Scrum, there is not a systemic focus on learning, right? So it's a lot easier to, as an individual product manager, as a member of a team, to rely on learning if the processes that you're using have learning embedded in them, right? If you're using like a regular learning readout where there's an expectation that in addition to developing or demoing working software, you're also demoing this week's learnings, right? And I think that if we could make a revolution of how people think about how software is developed, so that the expectation is learning is part of the output of a team, right? That is, if you go and ask executives and most software developers and most even product managers, what are the primary outputs for a software development team? It's code, right?
Yes.
It's working, testing
and
software.
Stories.
And stories. But those two things, absent of learning, it's how you get to a feature factory.
Right.
So if you believe that learning is the key to innovation, you have to build your system. You have to systematize the learning, because the learning is the thing that will get you the results. And you can't learning can't be a radical act that an individual is responsible for, that requires them to step out of the the flow, right? Right now, if you want to bring learning into most organizations, you're a radical.
Yes.
So if we want to truly make innovation like systematized, you have to make learning systematized. You would want an executive that said, I haven't seen a learning readout in 3 weeks. Why am I not seeing, I haven't seen us kill a feature. I haven't seen us pivot, right? Like those things.
I haven't seen prototypes.
I haven't seen prototypes.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing proofs of concepts coming out of the development team. All I'm seeing is features, which are good, but they're a piece.
Oh man, so many thoughts.
So I watched Jeff Patton speak last week, and he's kind of advocating right now engineering teams should look at every, we'll call them story, but every body of work, and they should say, is the effort with this for us to earn, or is it the effort to learn? And that everything that should come through the flow of work should be kind of tagged as that. Oh, we're building a thing, and we have a goal to come out of it with a set of learnings. Here's what we want to learn. Or we've learned these things. Now, this particular piece of software is designed for us to sell. And now this is an earning piece of software, which I think is a good idea. I also just think that if you make learning an expected outcome for a team, it just changes the trajectory of how everybody thinks about what a team should be building. Especially if the engineers get to own it, right? Dual track is really popular, but dual track has kind of UX and product on a learning track and engineering on a building track. But you want your engineers on the learning track too, right? Like they need to be spending a sizable amount of their time thinking about how am I learning and what are the things that I need to be learning and why do I want to be learning?
So how do we learn about our users? Is this just interviews?
Can I jump back on this really fast? Two things. Let me start with this one. Industrial design does this really well because there's two big barriers to entry. Time, like you can't just go make mold, like it takes time to build a physical product, and money. You can't just go build molds for a product that you don't know like almost certainly is going to make money.
You will spend between $250,000 and $500,000 just on one mold.
Right there.
We're talking about the Tesla mold.
Yeah, I mean, like there's thousands.
That's for a little widget, right?
And software doesn't have those same barriers. You can build software fast compared to industrial design. It's lightning speed.
Sure.
And it does actually cost a lot of money. But not until it's too late. Like it doesn't cost you a lot of money until you've shipped the thing. And what's the streaming service that had like $1 billion of investment and it was built?
It has a J in it.
CNN Plus is another one.
Yeah, they just
Meg Whitman's startup.
Like it didn't cost a lot of money until it was all the way built and no one wanted it.
Yeah.
They spent billions of dollars. They spent over $1 billion in 8 months.
And so
Quibi, thank you.
Quibi. So we don't have that. And so it's really easy to say, well, we just need people producing. We just need people writing code. Like back to the first episode, line in the water. We just need line in the water or we're not catching fish, right? And this is my thing to quote Mike Tyson, like everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Like, that's great. Now imagine having no plan and getting punched in the face. This is the equivalent of never talking to customers. You have no plan, you launch your thing, and then you get punched in the face. It's like you're walking down the street. Like, at least if you're in the boxing ring, you know it's coming. If you're just walking down the street, you get punched in the face. This is a really bad situation.
Yeah.
The other thing on Agile and Scrum, we have project managers here. I love them. I think they provide a lot of value. Like resource planning, helping us identify risks, asking hard questions about delivery, helping make sure we understand delivery.
My project manager is out on paternity leave right now, and it is difficult.
And that is all so helpful.
Yeah.
If you think about, this is the thing that maybe they're not going to like, and I love you, project managers. If you think about like an MVP of Agile, like when I got here, we're an MVP of Agile mode. what are the very first things that you implement? Like when I talk to my project management colleagues, they say, well, Agile is about learning. It's about learning.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you look at what are the first meetings? Stand up, not learning focused. Okay. Backlog grooming, not learning focused. Sprint planning, not learning focused.
In fact, there's not a single meeting there that's for
There's
learning.
not a single meeting in the MVP of Agile or even the fully fleshed Agile.
Even
that is
retro
learning.
is only for learning about how the team could optimize
Yes.
for delivery.
Yes.
It is not about learning about the customers or learning about how the product could be iterated on.
And so we have we have the Agile Manifesto, which I actually really appreciate and I love it. They talk about, it's more about the customers.
Well, and it's why
more about learning. And then the implementation of Agile Scrum has no learnings or customer focus required anything.
it's why I've started to reframe it. I don't believe that Agile is inherently the problem, because if you read the manifesto, if you read the 12 principles, they are very focused on customers and learnings. I personally believe it's now just kind of Scrum is the problem. Scrum is a manifestation of the problem.
Yeah.
Safe is even a worse manifestation of the problem. But part of the problem for Scrum is it's also the most popular version of Agile. And it's a version that everybody believes they know how to do well.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what do we give our project management friends? What can we, like all of them everyone I've talked to in projects, they don't want to not be learning focused.
We just say we want to radicalize our Agile process by implementing some additional ceremonies.
Yeah.
There should be, just like with stand-up, and stand-up really shouldn't be about status, ever. Stand-up is not a status tool. There should be something that happens right after status that's about learnings for the day. I think you guys are doing something like this.
Yeah, we do.
There should be in addition to demoing software, a team should demo learnings. And it should be something that is done, a sprint demo should be to demo software, and it should be to demo learnings.
Yep.
And if your team is carrying stories from sprint to sprint, you have to stop it. Because
quit right now
because
it's a drug.
You cannot learn off of unfinished software, right? The only ways you can learn is to take a proof of concept or a prototype to market, or to take working software to market. But the piece of software that will never let you learn is something you don't finish, right? And so a toxic behavior for any Agile team is carrying stories. If you're carrying stories, you should go and in your next retro, figure out how to never carry a story again. Put less stories in a sprint, make your stories smaller, because the goal for working tested software isn't that we want to have software in market. It's so we can learn from the software, right? The learning is always the point. And so you've got to be able to get your software into market and actually deliver it. I think it was Jacob, our data guy, said he had worked at a place that had A/B software, like kind of a really good A/B infrastructure, but they would blind deploy all of the things all the time, and like people weren't actually testing it. They're feature flagging everything and building software and not releasing it, which is just as bad as not building the software to begin with. So you got to get the software that you build into people's hands, or they can't give you feedback about it and you can't learn.
Yeah, so it seems like there's two forms of learning, right? There's I see a problem, I see users, I see pain. I think I have an opportunity. What can I learn here before we start building? And then we've delivered something. Let's see how they interact with it.
I think there's also, and this is a non-product learning, this is an engineering learning. I think I'm going to build this portion of this solution to see if this is technically feasible. Mm-hmm. I'm going to build a portion of this solution to see if this is feasible on the business side, right? I think you can have, when we're thinking about how to replace assumptions with evidence, not everything is necessarily about the user. Sometimes It's about the assumptions we might have about the technical landscape or the
And-
systems and again, your goal should be what's the very smallest thing I can do to get evidence about the assumption that I have.
And depending on your solution or your problem, you might have a prototype that's a live data prototype where you're just pulling out the data because you think the data is important. And you can take data and in 30 minutes put it into a dashboard that's not hideous.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe all you have is a backend engineer and you say, or maybe you know some data stuff yourself, Python or SQL or something. You just pull the data out and then you write on a piece of paper, hey person, I'm building this product. What if it told you this stuff about you? And it's their data and they always say, oh, is this my data? And you say, yes. And then you have their attention.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's on the flip side, it's less about the data, then maybe you just build like a sham front end, even in Figma. Like it does, and you can click through it.
Literally a wireframe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then that can teach you so much. Like those are prototypes.
The other side of this, and this is kind of on the engineering development side, I worked with a really great architect, and his mantra was always hit the hardest problem first. And so, like, new API nobody's ever worked with before, he would have his engineers build a little mini proof of concept utilizing that API that was ugly, that it was just to test, can we get the data back and forth, right? He's testing a feasibility assumption in the simplest ways possible because that was going to drive a lot of the decisions around the product. But in product, a lot of times we don't necessarily think about what else we can learn that's beyond just a customer's desire that might help us understand like how to be more agile ultimately.
Absolutely.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Product-ish. Thanks so much to Cameo and Connor for joining us and sharing their thoughts. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to tune in next time for more conversations about product innovation. Until then, I am Dallin Curry, and this has been Product-ish.